Once the poet gets here, he will just join us on stage. Thanks everybody for coming to what is the fourth installment of the Steel City reading series. I'm Jason from Wolfgang Books. And thanks again to Steel City Coffee House for being such gracious hosts throughout this first run of the series. Today we are now welcoming to, and we will be welcoming a third contributor to the anthology Prompted, which is a collaboration of the Philadelphia Workshop Studio and Philadelphia Stories magazine. Each writer that's here today has a piece in the anthology, and we have three different styles represented. Jill Bellack is a fiction writer, Aline Kneff is nonfiction, and Todd Stevens will be joining us as the poet. Before we get into questions, how this works is I'll ask the three guests some questions, and then they'll read for a little while, and then we'll open up to audience questions. And then at the end, they'll be on hand and available to sign books. But before we get started, if anybody has a cell phone with a loud ringer, if you could take a moment to silence that, so as the reading is not interrupted. Copies of the anthology Prompted are available from Natalie over there. And as I said, the writers will be on hand to sign copies at the end of the event. We take cash, credit cards, checks, gold, whatever. Anything but BP stock. We'll hear each of them read in a little bit, but let's welcome them to the piece. So my first question for both of you, and you can answer however you want, whatever order you want, but if you could talk a little bit about the Philadelphia Workshop Studio and what led you both to it.
Sure, I'll start. Allison Hicks is the director of the program, Greater Philadelphia Workshop Studio, and she runs two workshops, one in Philadelphia and one in Havertown. And I've been participating in the Havertown one for a little bit more than 4 years. And almost by a fluke, I was wandering around the Italian market with a friend of mine one day and happened upon a copy of Philadelphia Stories. I had heard about Philadelphia Stories before that, but hadn't seen a copy, so I picked it up and started reading it. And I found Allison's ad, and I thought, Havertown? Right in my neighborhood. I've been writing for a while before that, but I had never been part of a writing workshop. I'd taken a lot of classes, workshops, sort of one-off things, but I hadn't done anything with the same group over an extended period. So I thought it would be something worth trying. So I've been doing it ever since.
And for me, I was actively looking for a workshop. I had taken fiction writing classes, and just something was missing. And I went on the internet and just looked up Philadelphia area writing workshops, and I found Allison's, called her, and she said, well, why don't you come and sit in on a session first and see if it's for you. And right away, it was for me, and I've been participating, I guess, for 3 years.
And are both of the pieces that you have included in this anthology a product of the shop, the workshop?
The first draft of my piece I did, we have a writing period every time we get together, and so the writing period only lasts for about 20 minutes or so, but the first draft I did of this piece was in the workshop.
And mine, I think, is the opposite, because I had written this before I even joined the workshop, and it was the first manuscript that I brought in. Part of what we do is we exchange manuscripts, and we take turns every week, and then we agree to read it at home, and we'll come in the next week and talk about what we liked, or ways to improve it, what we think. So I brought this one in, and it had a totally different ending. And one of the things that everybody in the workshop said was, we really like it, but we just don't believe this ending. And basically they said, you're not being honest. And I remember those words. And I ended up going home and eventually rewriting it. And it was a totally different ending. It went from like a happily ever after to not so happy. And I thought, I can't share this because people will think I'm weird or whatever. But I ended up, of course, being fearless, and I brought it back in, and basically everybody said, you know what, you nailed it. And so the lesson is that I learned from the workshop, if you're honest with what you're writing, what you're creating, it works.
And so you each had a pretty good idea of what type of writing you were working in before the workshop, because that was something that I was curious about, is how the workshop approaches form. Like if you do you try out a bunch of different things? Like, do you have an idea, like Eileen, for your story about the judging the dance contest? Like, do you try writing that as a poem, or did you know from the get-go that it was a personal essay or not, nonfiction, creative nonfiction?
I really just write personal essays. I really write nonfiction. So that's the way I go. it's just the style that's most comfortable for me. So, but I think we all learn from each other, no matter what form we're working in. I mean, Jill writes fiction, but she has beautiful repetitions and rhythms in her fiction that I think are poetic. So she has something to share with poets. I think we all have something to share with each other. It's not so much about the form, but we can all respond to each other's writing wherever we're coming from.
Okay. Then, so you were fiction pretty much through and through, or?
I don't know what I am.
Yeah, right.
Comes out. So, but everyone in the workshop is different. Everyone has their own style. Some people are writing memoirs, some people are writing fiction, poets. I mean, it's all different.
And some people work in more than one form.
Okay. And we're talking with Eileen earlier. I asked her if everybody works together at the poets workshop with the fiction writers and nonfiction writers and all that. And she said that yes, that's the way it works. How does that work for you? I mean, when do you think a poet gives you your work? I mean, I think that's a really cool aspect of the workshop is that you have all these different perspectives. But what have you each kind of taken from that?
I think the best part of it is just, especially in the beginning, we get a prompt and we write, and then if we want to read, we can read. And sometimes you don't really know what you're writing or if it's good or whatever. And a poet might say to me, well, the rhythm, or just, I like the sound of all the S words. And I didn't even realize I was doing that. So they're coming from it, from a poetic way. And somebody, who writes nonfiction will see something else in it. So it's really good to get the different perspectives.
Well, I write nonfiction, but really the way that creative nonfiction is the term that's used a lot these days, and creative nonfiction borrows from fiction writing. It borrows devices. So you want to have a storyline. You want to have characters. They're real people. They're real things that happen, but you want to tell the story creatively. And so I find that I read fiction like crazy. I don't write fiction, except the only fiction I write is with my niece Sam. We have stories that we write back and forth where she writes one part and I write the next part. That's the only fiction I write. But I think the storytelling and the devices that are used in fiction are very useful to me as a nonfiction writer. And poetry too. I mean, sometimes I like to play with words. There's wordplay in nonfiction and just other economies of language that you can learn from poetry. So I think they all feed off each other in a really nice way.
Yeah, I think that's a great approach to workshop experience. And now, Eileen, your essay is about a pretty distinct Philadelphia experience. And without revealing the whole essay, which I assume you're reading from briefly, how do your experience with the Philadelphia area inform you as a writer?
Well, I've always lived in the Philadelphia area. The piece that I'll read really takes place in Philadelphia, so it's very much a Philadelphia story. I only have one other piece, really, that I've written that is very much about Philadelphia, and that's kind of about living in the suburbs and going into the city every day and what the commuting experience is like. So I guess all of my writing somehow has to do with this part of the world because it's where I've always lived, but I also do a lot of travel writing, and so I would say maybe more broadly, writing about place is something that appeals to me. Sometimes the place is Philadelphia and sometimes it's somewhere else.
Right. And Jill, how about you? I mean, what do you take from the Philadelphia area as a writer?
Well, I grew up in Northeast Philly, so I'm a Philly girl, and I don't really write about Philadelphia, but I can say that some of the teachers that I've had in the Philadelphia schools really encouraged me and got me, very early on to realize that this is something that